All right, that's what I'm talking about. Now, everyone, give it up for the maid of honor, Angelica Schuyler.
A toast to the groom,
to the groom, to the groom, to the groom,
to the bride,
to the bride, to the bride.
From your sister,
Angelica, Angelica,
who's always by your side. To your union,
to the revolution,
and the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied. I just might regret that night for the rest of my days. I remember those soldier boys tripping over themselves to win our praise. I remember that dream like candlelight, like a dream that you can't quite place. But Alexander, I'll never forget the first time I saw your face. I have never been the same. Intelligent eyes in a hunger-pang frame. And when you said hi, I forgot my dang name. Set my heart aflame, every part aflame. This is not a game.
Strike me as a woman who has never been satisfied.
I'm sure I don't know what you mean. You forget yourself.
You're like me, I'm never satisfied.
Is that right?
I've never been satisfied.
My name is Angelica Schuyler.
Alexander Hamilton.
Where's your family from?
Unimportant, there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait, just you wait.
So this is what it feels like to match wit with someone at your level. What the hell is the catch? It's the feeling of freedom, of seeing the light. It's Ben Franklin with the key and a kite. You see it right? The conversation lasted 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Everything we said in total agreement. It's a 3 minutes, a bit of a dance, a bit of a posture, it's a bit of a stance. He's a bit of a flirt, but I'ma give it a chance. I asked about his family, did you see his answer? His hands started fidgeting, he looked askance. He's penniless, he's flying by the seat of his pants. Handsome boy, does he know it? Peach fuzz, and he can't even grow it. I wanna take him far away from this place. Then I turn and see my sister's face, and she is helpless. And I know she is helpless. And her eyes are just helpless. And I realize 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time.
Where are you taking me?
I'm about to change your life.
Then by all means, lead the way.
number 1.
I'm a girl in a world in which my only job is to marry rich. My father has no son, so I'm the one who has to social climb for one. So I'm the oldest and the wittiest, and the gossip in New York City is insidious. And Alexander is penniless. That doesn't mean I want him any less. Elizabeth Schuyler, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Schuyler.
My sister.
Number 2.
He's after me, cause I'm a Schuyler sister that elevates a status side. Have to be naive to set that aside. Maybe that is why I introduce him to Eliza. Now that's his bride. Nice going, Angelica, he was right. You will never be satisfied. Thank you for all your service.
If it takes fighting a war for us to meet, it will have been worth it.
I'll leave you to it.
Number 3.
I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. If I tell her that I love him, she'd be silently resigned. He'd be mine. She would say I'm fine. She'd be lying. But when I fantasize at night, it's Alexander's eyes as I romanticize what might have been if I hadn't sized him up so quickly. At least, my dear Eliza's his wife. At least I keep his eyes in my life. To the groom!
To the groom, to the groom,
To the bride! To the bride!
to the bride.
From your sister!
Angelica,
Who's always by your side. To your union! And the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied.
rich folks love more than going downtown and slumming it with the poor. They pull up in their carriages and gawk at the students in the common just to watch them talk. Take Phillipa Soo, the man is loaded. Uh-oh, but little does he know that his daughters, Peggy, Angelica, Eliza, sneak into the city just to watch all the guys at work.
Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy,
The Schuyler Sisters.
Angelica,
Peggy,
Eliza.
Daddy said to be home by sundown.
Daddy doesn't need to know.
Daddy said not to go downtown.
Like I said, you're free to go, but look around, the revolution's happening in New York.
Angelica, work.
It's bad enough Daddy wants to go to war.
People shouting in the square.
It's bad enough there'll be violence on our shore.
New ideas in the air. Look around, Angelica, remind me what we're looking for.
She's looking for me.
Eliza, I'm looking for a mind at work. I'm looking for a mind at work. I'm looking for a mind at work. Whoa, 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 whoa. Work.
Ooh, there's nothing like summer in the city. Someone in a rush next to someone looking pretty. Excuse me, miss, I know it's not funny, but your perfume smells like your daddy's got money. While you slumming in the city in your fancy heels, you searching for an urchin who can give you ideals.
Sir, you disgust me.
Ah, so you've discussed me. I'm a trust fund, baby, you can trust me.
I've been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine. So men say that I'm intense or I'm insane. You want a revolution, I want a revelation. So listen to my declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'ma compel him to include women in the sequel. Work! Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening in Manhattan, and we just happen to be in the greatest city in the world. In the greatest city in the world. 'Cause I'm the crown, so they say that I'm a peddler, I'm insane. You want a revolution, I want a revelation. To my declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening in Manhattan, and we just happen to be in the greatest city in the world. In the greatest city in the world. Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy, the Schuyler Sisters. We're looking for a mind at work. Hey, in the greatest city, in the greatest city in the world. In the greatest city in the world. Boy, you got me helpless. Look into your eyes and the sky's the limit. I'm helpless. Down for the count and I'm drowning in 'em. I have never been the type to try and grab the spotlight. We were at a revel with some rebels on a hot night, laughing at my sister as she's dazzling the room. Then you walked in and my heart went boom, trying to catch your eye from the side of the ballroom. Everybody's dancing in the band's top volume. Grind to the rhythm as we wine and dine. Grab my sister and whisper, yo, this one's mine. My sister made her way across the room to you, and I got nervous thinking, what you gonna do? She grabs you by the arm, I'm thinking I'm through. Then you look back at me and suddenly I'm helpless. Oh, look at those eyes, and I'm helpless. Down for the count and I'm drowning in 'em. Helpless. So into you. Look into your eyes, so into you. I'm helpless. I know I'm down for the count and I'm drowning in 'em.
Good evening. My name is Natalie Reyes, and I'm the President and CEO at Latino Victory Project. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Women of Hamilton in celebration of 100 years of women's right to vote. I would like to thank Lin-Manuel Miranda, our board chair, Luis Miranda, and Soledad O'Brien. Thank you for making the Women of Hamilton event possible, and for all you do to continue supporting Latino Victory Project. We are here to honor women's right to vote, a milestone in history that opened the door for women to gain agency over their lives and access to political and economic power. The passage of the 19th Amendment was only the first step in the path to equal representation and empowerment. Women of color still had to fight for the right to vote. For the past 100 years, women have been winning battles and breaking barriers. Last week, we celebrated a historic milestone when Senator Kamala Harris became the nominee for Vice President of the United States. A daughter of immigrants and the first Black woman to serve as Vice President on a major United States presidential ticket. We also celebrated milestones for Latinas in recent years. Catherine Cortez Masto became the first Latina elected to the United States Senate. Michelle Lujan Grisham became the first Democratic Latina state governor elected in the United States. And in 2018, the United States House of Representatives welcomed 5 Latinas, including the first elected to represent the state of Texas. These were important milestones in a journey that women initiated 100 years ago. Now we continue walking the trail blazed by pioneers like Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Ida B. Wells, and Adelina Otero. Tonight, we are joined by a new generation of women who inspire us and who continue forging the path for the next generation of fearless leaders. Our special gratitude to Renee Elise Goldsberry, to Jasmine Cephas Jones, to Phillipa Soo for leading this important conversation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of this event, Loretta Everett Kaufman. She's a philanthropist, an activist, an author, and a true partner to us at Latino Victory Project. Loretta, thank you for your commitment and for joining us today.
Welcome. This month, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing women the right to vote. The language is simple. It says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. But getting to ratification was not simple. It took decades to get it done. Years of fighting, protest, agitation, and demonstrations for equality and justice, not unlike what we see on our streets today. And even after ratification, it failed to fully enfranchise African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and Native American women. Yet passage meant that women, and today more specifically women of color, could ultimately advocate for jobs, fair wages, education, and run for office. They too could push for economic and social fairness and a chance to realize the American dream. And that's why we're here tonight. I'm honored to chair this very special one-night-only event benefiting Latino Victory with my friend Lin-Manuel Miranda and the Schuyler Sisters from the original Broadway cast of Hamilton. My husband, Vic, and I are thrilled to support Latino Victory's important work. And now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Soledad O'Brien. She is an award-winning journalist, speaker, author, and philanthropist, and we are honored to have her as part of this conversation. Soledad, passing it to you.
Thank you for joining us for this special one-night-only event with Lin-Manuel Miranda and the original Schuyler Sisters from Broadway's Hamilton. Earlier this summer, they made history by bringing a film of the original cast of the record-breaking show to Disney Plus for millions of viewers to see during this very unprecedented time. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And though white women were granted the right to vote in 1920, most women of color could only vote as a result of the Voting Rights Act, which passed in 1965. So as we celebrate this moment, which comes 2.5 months ahead of what's probably the most important election in our nation's history, we also need to recognize just how far we have still to go. This conversation is about the women of Hamilton, their role in the show, how the original Schuyler Sisters developed their characters, and the significance that they have in context of today. So Lin-Manuel, let's begin at the very end. You have Eliza's monologue where she really frames herself as kind of how Alexander Hamilton's story kind of came to be eventually. Why did you end that way?
A couple of reasons. I remember being knocked flat by the final chapter of Ron's book, where you see that Eliza lives twice as long as Hamilton was alive, and really dedicates herself to his story being told, but then also goes on to have just this extraordinary life of her own. In one of the details that was too on the nose to even put in the final song, she opened a school in Washington Heights, which was what my first musical was about. And I even wrote a lyric about that, and I was like, I can't go there. It feels self-referential, and we just want to be swept up in the tears and the orphanage. But, you know, I think one of the major themes of the show is who tells your story determines how your story gets told. And so the fact that Eliza lives for so long, almost up to the Civil War. I mean, she meets Lincoln as a senator, is extraordinary and sort of tells us everything we need to know.
Women are very consistently written out of the narrative or just left out altogether. And you really could have done, you know, a show called Hamilton about Hamilton and none of the women who are in his sphere, but they actually have a very big role, big central role. Why was that?
Well, you have to understand, I'm a product of the school play. I didn't fall in love with musicals by seeing a lot of musicals. I was like most people, you can afford maybe a special occasion birthday musical once every few years. You can afford to go to Broadway. And so I really fell in love with musicals by doing the school musical. And you know that, you know, girls try out more than guys. I remember directing in high school and being like, it's so unfair that there's so many male parts when women are the ones who run the show here and are the reason this theater exists. And so, you know, I think of In the Heights as like the ideal school musical, just lots of great parts for women. And so even when I was writing Hamilton, I just enjoy writing those parts, and they're complex and interesting parts of history. And I really tried to lean into the fact that we have these incredible, intelligent, complex women at a time when they're not given full agency. So they determine history in the ways they can. It's why I conveniently forgot the Schuyler sisters' many brothers. You know, they have brothers in real life, but I wasn't interested in the brothers. I was interested in these sisters and how they navigate the world.
At one point, of course, in the rap, right, we hear a sister talking about her role in society, both wildly wealthy, but also kind of stuck, right, determined by who she marries and who she associates with. And again, you don't get a lot of that insight into what's happening in women's lives, I think, as we explore somebody else's life altogether.
Yeah, and I think that one that was interesting to write about. Two, I think it's interesting to note that I almost didn't know if Angelica was going to be in the show because I've said this a million times. I will say it a million times more. You could write 5 to 10 musicals about Hamilton, never touching the same reference points and still have full set. It's 3 lifetimes worth of a life in one life. And one of the things that was a big determining factor in whether I pursued storylines or not was how much of Hamilton's life do they thread through? You know, Hamilton had close friends at the end of his life, one of whom delivered his eulogy, who is not in the show because we meet him too late and it's too late. We're moving too fast at that point. But including Angelica allowed us to tell a kind of story that isn't in the conventional, and this is his wife and this is their life together, but she occupies a far more interesting place. She was a contemporary. She corresponded with Thomas Jefferson. She corresponded with all that. She was known as this very witty, worldly person. And so the natural question is, well, isn't she the more natural romantic match for Hamilton and as an intellectual match for Hamilton? And so writing about all that was just really interesting. And then once we wrote the suite of Helpless and Satisfied, we said, we can't wait this long to meet these women. And so Schuyler Sisters came next, actually, because we wanted to meet them before Hamilton met them. Because we fell in love with I fell in love with the characters as I was writing them, and I wanted as much of them as possible.
Do you fall in love with the characters some more than others? I mean, is there a Schuyler sister that you'd say you love the most, and does that person get the bigger role, or do you love someone who has fewer words? How does it work?
Yeah, well, I think what you have to do as a writer is find your way into every character. You know, these are all really flawed people, and these are all my versions of these people. And so what you latch onto, or what I find I latch onto, is I find my way into each character. You know, I think finding with Angelica, who is someone who is near Hamilton, Alexander and Eliza's orbit their whole life, and may have had an emotional affair with Alexander, and but really doted on this family in addition to her own. That was an interesting thing to write about, and there's such a great tradition of unrequited love songs in musicals. I think of On My Own from Les Miserables, which is sort of the gold standard. And so I was like, how can I out on my own on my own? You know, so there's challenges as a songwriter and as a dramatist. But you know, the fun is in getting to play all of them. I loved being Angelica while I was writing Satisfied. I loved being Eliza while I was writing That Would Be Enough. I remember, I think if there's any song that's kind of a love letter to my own spouse, it's That Would Be Enough. And, you know, there's no historical reference point for that song. There's no moment where Eliza sat Alexander down and said, I love you and come home and spend more time with us. That was a song I felt like I needed to write, and Eliza needed to sing. So there's you know, you find your way in through research and empathy, and then if you're lucky, they start talking back to you and telling you what they need to say. And that was certainly the case with That Would Be Enough, and several other moments with these ladies.
Let's talk about the Peggy character. For the longest time, my children would run around when they were referring to a sibling who was a fifth wheel. It was like, and Peggy. It's like the worst thing you could possibly be in my family was the and Peggy, who was getting dragged along because someone was forcing you. You have Jasmine playing both roles when you opened. Well, why have one actor portraying two roles?
It was sort of a dramaturgical solution to the biopic problem. How do you make, first of all, listen, how many people can you name in your young life that were so formative that you never see again? Or people that you've met recently that have changed your life that there was no clue they were coming when you were a teenager or a young adult. So that's just an issue with life. So how do you, if you're going to dramatize a life, how do you keep it compelling without just an enormous cast of characters? And so one of the things we hit upon early was, if we double cast characters that are central to Hamilton's young life and then use those same actors to portray, you know, when David shows up and he goes, I'm Thomas Jefferson now, you're like, yeah, because we've fallen in love with David in the first act. And now he's dressed like Prince meets Andre 3000 and he says he's Thomas Jefferson. And so instantly we have a connection that we might not have had with a new actor coming out of nowhere. And so then once we made that decision, we began to try to thematically tie them. Not that their purposes are similar in Hamilton's life, but that there's a resonance. So Lafayette, who is the Frenchman in his life, you know, turns into the Francophile, who is fighting to, you know, work with the French Revolution and actually was friends with Lafayette in France. You know, Mulligan and Madison are studying contrasts. We have Mulligan as this bombastic, Buster Rhymesian guy, and then James Madison, who was famously very sickly, couldn't have looked less like Oak. He was maybe cleared 5 feet. And so again, it's also gives the actor more to do because it's like this study in contrasts. And with Peggy and Mariah, you know, the goal was sort of these, it's these women who loved Alexander in very different ways. There's correspondence between Peggy Schuyler and Alexander in their young life, where she actually really became a confidant to her. He was sort of like the cool older brother-in-law. And there's some very sweet correspondence there. And then there's Mariah Reynolds, who really doesn't get to tell her own story, either in history or in our show. I mean, it's a very Hamilton, Alexander-centric view of what went down. You know, Catherine Ryan did a brilliant stand-up routine lampooning that about, like, this is a kid, she's stuck in it, like, this is horrible. And that's all true, you know, but we're hearing Hamilton's perspective because that's the perspective that survives. So that's sort of the thinking behind the double casting.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that sort of everybody reads into the characters and what they see the way they want to see it, right? I think Mariah, who I've been calling Maria forever, I'll still tell everybody it's Mariah, really, I think a lot of people glommed onto that as sort of an example of Me Too, right? And now I think Black Lives Matter. I can't think of our founding fathers without thinking of most of them as being Black. I know that's not accurate, but I can't help myself. And so I wonder if it's encouraging, exciting, or just strange to have people kind of foist onto your product, your creation, kind of the element that they want to take out of it. Well, this is really a story about this. It's actually a story about this.
But that's always been the case with Hamilton. And that's what's so interesting about it. When you start talking about the founding of our country and the inherent contradictions and flaws of it that have been there since someone wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, we fell short of it the moment the ink dried. You know, that's all true. You are dealing with people's emotions about their own country, and that's as loaded as it gets. And so, yes, it's been interesting, but it's also, in a weird way, it's also what the show's about. The show is, because one of the things I realized, I was not a big history buff as a kid. I was doing the school play. But in doing the research to write this show and reading, you can read 2 books about the same guy and get completely different people off the same primary source texts. So one of the themes that went into the show was the person who tells the story determines the telling. So, you know, in this moment of, I think it's a really exciting moment. I'm thrilled by things like the 1619 Project, where we're telling the stories that aren't being told. You know, we're here to discuss, you know, the anniversary of women's suffrage, which is, there are so many stories that go into that were not in my history books growing up. And so I think it's a really exciting time. And then I think the fact that people read different things into the show is also a function of one of the themes of the show itself.
It's pretty remarkable to me that I think many of us went through school thinking that the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. And it's not until you get a lot older that there's sort of a little asterisk.
Yeah, little asterisks. Oh, wait, not you women.
No, not everybody who did mention that. And I remember learning that and just having it be so eye-opening and really having it underscore just how frequently these stories are left out of history. I mean, they're just not in the storytelling at all.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite shows is Drunk History on Comedy Central, which is such a silly premise. You get the narrator, I've been on it, you get the narrator drunk and they tell a story, but one of the things they've subversively done is tell a lot of stories that are not in our history books, in a humorous way, but in an accurate way. And I think that that's also what this moment seems to be about when we're debating statues, when we're debating the founding. We need so many reminders because of how much our history textbooks left out that the oppression, the right to vote, these are recent things for some people. You know, history isn't dead, it's not even past. You know, we're living with the legacies of these things, and it just wasn't that long ago.
And yet we argue
that long ago.
Right, today, we, as you say, you know, people fell short of their goals and ideals the minute they were signing their names to the document. Yeah. And yet, to this moment, we are still fighting about that. I mean, it seems almost offensive for some people, this idea that somehow history or our founding fathers got some of this stuff wrong, or contradicted themselves or were hypocritical as they said one thing and lived another life. Would you have wanted to, if someone said, listen, Hamilton can be 70 hours long, do whatever you want, here's all the money to produce it, what would you have added to that? Because I feel like there's so much of just that we live in today where people don't want to confront the stuff that was bad.
Yeah.
Like every founding father had to be the greatest, most wonderful, lovely person ever, when
Right.
even they in their own writings admitted their flaws.
Yeah, and that's certainly not the premise of our show. I don't believe we celebrate them. I believe we try to get as much of their flaws and humanity into as 2.5 hours of a musical and still let you out before Les Mis lets out next door. Yeah. But you know, one of the things I made available on the Hamilton mixtape was I did write a third cabinet battle, debate about slavery. The only time slavery came to the floor, it was by a delegation of Quakers led by Benjamin Franklin. And I made it a closed door debate between Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison. And Hamilton, and it was very cathartic to write. It was cathartic to write Hamilton calling George Washington out on his owning hundreds of people. At the same time, none of them did enough. So can we afford 4 minutes where, you know, everyone gets to rage and the audience feels great because we're finally saying the thing, but they didn't do anything. None of them kicked the ball down the field, you know, and so it just, it didn't fit in our 2.5 hour show. But I think if there's a 4 hour, 5 hour show, I think that's an excellent debate to be had, because the struggle always with telling a story set against this brutal practice is, you know, they're all complicit. When you buy a ticket and walk in the door, and that's why it's the third line of our show, they're all complicit in the system. This was going on while this story is being told. And so, you know, how do you, and at the same time, it would take a civil war to finally begin to undo it. And so, you know, does it make sense to spend 5 minutes on something none of them did enough about? That was my struggle as a dramatist. And so I wrote it and I made it available so you could see it and hear it, but it didn't make the final show.
You say history's not past, and it's so interesting because I wonder, as we create history now, I feel like so many other voices have just taken the opportunity to plant a stake in the ground and say, no, this is the story of Native American people, or Native American women, or women who are missing, or women who are sexually assaulted, or people of color, or people who are fighting for the people who are unjustly incarcerated. And it feels like now there's more opportunities because people don't want history to kind of steamroll them, and a narrative comes out the other end and they're not even mentioned in it. When you look forward 100 years, how will people think about the history of women the next 100 years after this first 100 years since the 19th Amendment?
Oh, I mean, it is, there are way more qualified people to discuss this than me, but, you know, this is, we've come so far and we still have so much farther to go. You know, when I think of, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, which is led by Black women, and so many women at the forefront of the change we're seeing in the streets and in the protests, and it's been really extraordinary. And also, you know, the record-setting number of female elected officials in the last midterms in 2018. And yet, don't go to a comment section of like a female elected official. I mean, the harassment, it's still so gross, and it's still so offensive to some people. I mean, it's really, it's one of the reasons I try to stay off the internet as much as possible. It's just like the disparity is so crazy, but I think it's an extraordinary time. And that thing what you mentioned about being part of the narrative, I think that's what everyone's asking for, and that's what's so exciting about this moment, is that we're seeing the narrative being shaped, and that makes for, just in my corner of the world of theater and movies and storytelling, like, that just means we get richer stories. It means we don't get the same stories over and over again. We're getting richer stories and new stories. So it's exciting in my field to hear more, have more voices in the room.
You know, in so many ways, as much as it's history, I feel like we're also on this cycle of repeating, right, back over and over and over again. I never thought we'd be continuing to debate women's rights or civil rights, or the Voting Rights Act would be something that people would have to fight for again.
Right.
It just seems kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that happens at the end of Hamilton is the pendulum swings back, right? It goes from Hamilton in power to Jefferson in power. He's outlived by his enemies. And I definitely feel like the past 3 years have been a pendulum swing back moment. The Voting Right Act of 1965 was so important. We've just lost one of our greats, John Lewis, and who's a giant, a moral giant in our country. And yeah, and we're having to fight some of the same fights again, but hopefully, I'm hopeful that comes with additional gains on top of re-legislating that fight. It has to.
Lin-Manuel, nice to chat with you.
Likewise.
And now let's get right to the Schuyler Sisters. So let's start at the very beginning. When you were premiering off Broadway, they say the spaces were very confined and small, and you're playing sisters. What was that like for bonding and getting to know each other?
We had no choice. I mean, I was the new one. I didn't do the workshop. I joined off Broadway at the public in rehearsals. And literally I sat down, and one of the first things Renee says to me is, "You look like one of my cousins."
You do, girl. The beauty is that now I look at you and I think she looks like you.
Yeah. I just like it, it was so special. I think with us, we didn't really have to work on a relationship. It just naturally happened, and it also happened so quickly. And then we were put in a dressing room together for 6 months, and you really, really get to know people when you're in a dressing room with them, and it was just so much fun.
It's so beautiful. We were in there together, and they always found a way to keep us together, even on Broadway. But I was looking back at old video. I'm like famous for shooting a lot of like BTS footage and never posting it. And so I have pictures of us from like day 2 of rehearsal for the public theater. I have this picture of Phillipa and Jasmine braiding each other's hair and laying on each other. I mean, so we were quick. We were quick sisters.
Yes.
Quick and forever.
What was it like to be, Phillipa, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we shared a lot of meals together in that dressing room. We sang a lot of songs together. I mean,
we cried.
We cried
together. I mean,
well, what was it like for you guys to be, I mean, you're part of a thing that was a phenomenon, right? When people describe Hamilton, it's like, it's a record-breaking, amazing phenomenon. What was that like for you to both be involved in it and come out the other side of it?
Well, it's something we're still figuring out, especially with the release of the film and this summer of 2020, that has also now become a summer of Black Lives Matter, a summer of social distancing, and a summer of Hamilton. It feels like a double dip into a once in a lifetime opportunity. That's what I keep saying. So to think we ever figured it out is kind of crazy, because it's always evolving. But one of the reasons why I feel so close to these women and to the entire company is because our experience is so unique. And when you go through something that you can't explain to anybody else, you're just glad that you can look in someone else's eyes and they understand what you're feeling, the gratitude and the complete exhaustion, and just the grace of it all.
Like when you're caught in the whirlwind of it, it's really, really hard to process, and that whirlwind becomes your norm, So when we were doing it for 2 years basically, and we're doing the White House and we're doing the Ham for Hams along with like the 8 shows a week, and then the film, and then the Grammys, and like all of this stuff, that becomes your norm, you know? And so even if you're like at 50%, you know, or like you can't, you know, you're tired or you're feeling like a little sick, that's going to still look like 75% or even 100% on stage, just because that's like, you know, you're like in it, you're like, you have tunnel vision. And so when that's over, kind of for me, it's like when you come down for that, the biggest thing that I'm grateful for is the people that I have met in this show and this cast and this family. It's a really beautiful thing when you get so close to people and you can look at people in their eyes and be like, help me today, you know, while you're on stage, literally. And you don't have to even say anything, you know, it's like, and then the person looks at you and it's like, I got you, you know. It's this bond that, you know, you create by performing like this beautiful work with these beautiful people that are so talented and also support you. And so from that and that experience and from the tunnel vision and what we all had to do to keep each other up becomes this family, you know, when it's done. And I think out of the whirlwind, out of the tunnel vision is this beautiful bond that, you know, it's like this once in a lifetime type thing that you, again, that Renee said, it's like you can't explain.
It sounds so amazing, and just like so special. And I'm curious if you had to remind yourselves in the middle of it to enjoy it, right? Because it sounds like you're kind of rolling from thing to thing to thing, and you don't want to. And maybe Phillipa, you could jump in on this. You don't want to miss a moment. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm so tired, I just need to get through the Grammys. You want to be like, oh, the Grammys, okay, we're at the Grammys. Like, that's phenomenal.
Totally. I mean, I think the beauty of having the three of us having each other just so close, like as friends, but also so close in proximity that our dressing rooms on Broadway were very close. I felt so grateful that my experience of what was going inside of my head, I could ultimately like work my way out of that and through that, because I would have the joy of watching Renee and the joy of watching Jasmine. And I can't tell you how many times it was so nice to just know that, you know, I could turn to Jasmine and she would have something very funny and wonderful and earthy and a wonderful perspective around what was happening. And I would turn to Renee and be like, what do we do, Renee? Like, what's going on? Jasmine and I would just be like, like so much wisdom. And then just at the end of the day, to get to laugh with each other was the best part.
Amazing. You know, it's one of the 10 million things that I loved about the show, and I'm sure everyone has, you know, when they run into you, grabs you and tells you, well, here's what I loved about the show. But I love the women are so strong and so interesting, right? They're not sort of just on the periphery and, oh yeah, over there and over there. They just have such interesting and important stories to share and tell, and they take up space and they get to sit in the center stage. What was it like to read those characters when you first saw, and I know you guys were workshopping it, what would that feel like to be like, wow, these, you know, some of the words you're saying are just so incredibly powerful, especially we don't get to see women of that era ever saying that or portrayed that way.
Yeah, I think that I think definitely that the contemporary music, that this contemporary sound, this very liberating way of singing these notes and singing these words, brought to a time where a lot of what was happening with women is not written down in the history books, and we can only sort of imagine what was going on in their internal life. I feel like was a key to accessing all of the fervor and passion and strength that obviously existed within women then, that we just don't hear about as much because history, you know, has ignored that part in many ways. So getting to, you know, step out with Schuyler Sisters and have that be the introduction of these three women is just, it's like a burst of energy and a reminder that like that energy was always there, that like they weren't always sitting in their houses and learning how to crochet. that life outside of that. And I think, the style of the music and the choreography and the camaraderie that was written into this script was so important in portraying that.
I love, I often talk about like the surprise I felt when I first heard the Schuyler Sisters. I talk most about the surprise I felt when I heard Satisfied, because that just blew my mind. But there was also a surprise in Schuyler Sisters, and that's the perspective that the women had on the world, because I always imagined anybody with that much, kind of suffering through that much oppression as they would have been aware of it on some level, and it would have just been bogged down by it. But the fact that they had this perspective that we're so lucky to be alive right now, look around, that excitement surprised me. And what I love about it is that it's right next to a very keen sense of what is not fair, what is not right, and how desperately this world needs us to fix it. And how unfortunate it is that our voice is muffled. But we're still screaming, we're still riffing, we're still singing loudly. That balance between an acknowledgement of what's wrong and a responsibility to do something about it, and also an acknowledgement of the blessing of the moment, is what really I want to take the most from who these women were, especially today, especially right now. We really have to do both things, all of those things. We have to be aware of what's wrong. We have to be responsible for changing it. But we also have to acknowledge that this is a blessing. Even this 2020, this mess, this is a blessing. That I'm here right now is a blessing. And if I know that, I can be the sequel.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, and Jasmine, I'd love to hear you weigh in on that, right? This idea of like, it's an exciting time to be alive, but whoo, things are unfair. That could be the soundtrack of 2020 with not much, a little bit of work there. What do you think, Jasmine?
I mean, we're not saying, I feel like I say this a lot, but like, we're not saying one day our prince will come. We're saying we're looking for a mind at work.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's literally everything about the Schuyler Sisters and their bond and their love for each other, and that they'll fight for each other, and they'll, fight for people to listen to them. Throughout that song, she's looking at Byrne. She's like, are you listening to me? That is so important. Even today, sometimes it's so hard for people to listen to women, for us to like get our voice out. And it's happening more and more, but back then it was so rare. So for the Schuyler Sisters to come out and represent that is everything. And it's everything that they stand for, and their theme for the show. It's like, that's what they represent. Love and support for the women, and that they have voices, and it's important for you to hear them.
Jasmine, Mariah Reynolds, seductress, villain, victim, all of the above? We'll never.
I think it's what Lynn was saying, earlier. It's like a little unfair, because she does get portrayed as like the villain, but she was married when she was 15 years old to James Reynolds, and end up having an affair with Hamilton at 23. She was so young, and I think kind of pulled into, these chain of events, which is unfortunate. And then, the Reynolds pamphlet comes out, and she becomes this object of scrutiny. Like basically the first newspaper, the first like newspaper to, gossip and talk about an affair, like ever. So I kind of, the way that I played her and looked at her was more of survival. And that's how, when I thought of her and would, come out and do the whole walking in the red dress and perform that song, it was more of survival and her, being desperate a little bit. So I don't want to call her the villain, because it, it also takes two to tango, and there was two people in the situation, but I feel like she was just really young and kind of in this abusive relationship and was kind of forced into this. And I don't really think she really had a choice at that time.
Phillipa, talk to me about Burn, which is a song of empowerment that I have heard so many 16-year-old girls sing. And so many. So many, some nailing it, some coming close. But what I've always loved about that song, right? It's really a song of empowerment. It's taking back your mad and taking back your power. How did you think about your character? I mean, how does it work as an actor? Do you have to, they used to talk about method actors, like, running into walls. I don't know. How do you get into character?
Like, did I burn a bunch of stuff? Is that what?
Ripping up old things from ex-boyfriends over the years. Let me practice on Bob. Let me practice on Steve.
First of all, like, how many times as a 16-year-old did I just want to, like, say, I hope that you burn?
It's a good song.
Ideas and things that I just couldn't, like, quite wrap my head around.
Is that your puppy barking?
Yes,
No,
I'm sorry.
You should bring him into the shot zone so we can see him or her. They obviously want to be in the conversation. Go ahead, Phillipa.
I was going to say, I mean, so I guess to sort of navigate around what it meant for Eliza to reclaim her honor and her life and her sense of self by doing something that is a very personal thing. I mean, she's not going out there and saying, all right, Alexander, I'm leaving you, or I'm going to tell everyone how terrible you are. It's a personal choice for herself. So I think, there's a very powerful and deep thing that happens when you choose for yourself to make a shift in your way of walking through the world and your relationships. There's power within, right? Especially since these women couldn't find a lot of power otherwise. So with these letters, and I think there's a very important line, which is, I'm erasing myself from the narrative. And I think throughout her journey with Hamilton and through the end of the play, the who lives, who dies, who tells your story. It's so imperative that we remember that we only have so much control, but the control that we do have, it can be meaningful. So with these letters, she makes the decision to burn them and essentially take herself out of that part of the narrative. As like a self-protest, or as a way to sort of heal from the wounds of this betrayal. But I think in that she finds power, that she has control over this situation in the little way that she does. And as we see throughout the play, and Lynn says this and Hamilton says this, legacy, what is a legacy? It's planting seeds in the garden you never get to see. And it was up to Eliza to be able to uphold his legacy. And so ultimately, aside from making sure that everything was fireproofed, that I was burning, I think just the experience of an actor relating to something like these letters, like, her relationship to him, and actually seeing them physically burn in front of her is a very empowering thing to do. So yeah, it was fun to get to actually work with that every night, because it's not so often that you get to have real fire on stage.
Renee, I'm curious for you, did you do historical research around your characters? I mean, I know there were liberties taken, as they say, but did you, in addition to what was scripted, did you want to know more?
Lynn gave me a signed copy of Common Sense by Thomas Paine really early. And I thought to myself, oh my God, he's so great. and this is going to be worth a lot of money one day. And I didn't read it till much later. Yeah, I had done many shows by the time I read that book. You know, there was no time, girl. There was no time. The beauty, you know, the beauty about like a biographer like, you know, Ron Chernow and his entry into kind of telling history and that kind of kindred spirit. I mean, when you listen to Lin talk about like what was motivating him and empathy motivating him and his excitement about the relationships and his love of the women. I mean, like when Lin was just talking, I was remembering a conversation I had with Ron Chernow about this moment in his life where he was dating this one sister and she had other sisters that were also like, you know, doting on him, and he felt like he was dating them all. Like these things, there are so many interesting ways to get into a story. And for me as an actor, the two most important really are me, you know, my own experience and the things that moved me and as an empath, and the things that moved the storyteller. It's just so rich. And the words that are just there. I mean, the words that are just there are so rich, especially because there's something very specific that this character is doing in probably the most important thing that she does is not real in the world of history. It's just not real. It doesn't happen. She's 21, it's 1777, and she's eloped, she's gone, you know? So the most exciting, dramatical, like the reason I showed up to do this, for this moment with this glass is a convention that is not based in historical accuracy, but is the most amazing theatrical moment that I think has ever existed, and definitely that I'll ever get to do in my lifetime. So so much that's right there. There's so much that's right there. That's so fertile. It's definitely where I start, and everything else is gravy on top of it. I do believe there is a lot to learn from this woman today, right now, and the influence that she had on all of these key players, and the way that she wielded her power in spite of the fact that she was limited, and you know, in spite of the fact that she should have been, you know, at least the second president, at least. Yes. You know, that's inspiring to me, and I'm grateful that this musical and the dramatic conventions that gave her a reason to exist in this world are the gateway to getting to know who she actually was. I'm really grateful for that. So I definitely do all of those things. I just not necessarily in the order that maybe Phillipa did them.
Lin, you heard him say that, you know, Hamilton had enough like life material to do 3 different versions of his life, all from different points of view, almost probably not really repeating some of the content in a lot of ways. Was there anything that you feel like you wish there had been more of that was left out? And I guess this question for all of you. You know, was there some piece that you're like, oh, I just wish there had been more of this?
You know, there were people that were calling me, begging me to ask, you know, Lin to do things like, please keep the reprise of Dear Theodosia in this show. You know, everything was always so good. It was hard to lose anything. I was, you know, I remember when they were taking curse words out, and I was like, no, you can't ruin the show. Like, you know, and they never did. I think it's pretty perfect.
Pretty perfect. I mean, there were things that were cut from like the public that we were all like, oh, why can't it just stay? Like the Adams administration, you know, that was a whole entire
John Travolta. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I don't know what I would add, but I certainly know that if we could make another musical or like a series about Eliza's life, it would be incredible because, well, just to give you some context, so Eliza lived 50 years past Hamilton's death.
She died at 90 something, right?
Yes, like basically saw through until the Civil War. But just to give you some context for your brain, So Eliza was tight with Dolly Madison, and they raised funds for the Washington Monument. So they were there when the cornerstone was laid for the Washington Monument on July 4th, 1848, okay? 15 days later is Seneca Falls Convention.
Yeah.
She was there, she was around, she was seeing all of the things that were changing from the time of Hamilton's death all the way to her own death, and how much the world had changed in that time. I mean, that's a whole musical in itself, right? So yeah, I don't know. Lynn, what do you think?
What are you doing? I mean, come on, man, get on it, get on it. I asked Lynn this question earlier, and I'm curious for the rest of you. As you well know, I think people voiced so much onto the show, right? They see what they want. They can see it as a Black Lives Matter, or statements about social justice, or even just this idea of who has to represent who on the stage, or Me Too movement as well. Is that weird? Is that sort of how you feel art is supposed to be?
I think as long as people are starting the conversation, like, that's all that matters. I don't think the show is exactly one thing. It can't be one thing. It is many, many things. But as long as people are starting the conversation, that's the key. Do you know what I mean? To open up more conversations. I think that is like the most important thing, is to get people talking, to make change. So it can't be one specific thing. It's so many things. It's like unworldly, so many things.
I was excited when just watching kind of how the world changes and kind of what Hamilton looks like in that, through that perspective. People, I think, were like, are you worried? Are you scared? Now it's Black Lives Matter. You didn't know it was going to be Black Lives Matter when you said you were going to release Hamilton. Now what's going to happen? You know what I mean? And I'm like, bring it on. Bring it all on. It is already there. It was already baked into this recipe. That's what art is. I mean, any art is only a reflection of you. That's what it is. You get from it what you need to get from it. It's like, the way we ingest meals and what vitamins we take, that's what it is. So I've always felt that, what you say about a piece of art is really telling me about who you are and what you need, and what you need to rage about, or what you need to celebrate. And this meal really works for everything I've seen so far. I don't know what's coming, but I'd put my money down on the fact that there is something in this message that Lynn might not have even been aware of, just in the way that Eliza wasn't aware of what was coming, in the way that Hamilton wasn't aware of what was coming. That will speak to that time, to the people that need to hear something.
I think it also shows how important art is, because not only, art is dependent on having a relationship with an audience. Without people to witness the art, it doesn't exist, right? So in its creation, in the morals and lessons that we might learn from these stories that we're telling through this art, it's, like you're saying, Renee, only just as important as what you're taking from it as an audience member. And I truly believe that artists are also historians in this country, because the art that they make, the time that people are witnessing it, is reflective of what's happening in that moment. And that's why art is such a beautiful thing, is that it continues a conversation, it spurs new conversations, it makes you question old conversations. And there's never really, I think the most important part is that it's not necessarily about the answer that you come to, but the questions that are asked of you when you're witnessing it, when you're becoming a part of this artistic experience. So yes, like, it will forever change. And like you're saying, Renee, like, who knows in 50 years what we're gonna think about Hamilton, but I bet you there will be something to gain from it.
Do you think women take away something different from Hamilton than men?
Women always take something unique from everything. I think so. I think so. I think it would have been it's always a mistake. I think advertisers learned this a long time ago, like sell to the women. Sell to the women. I think, just in the way that, art speaks to everybody specifically, you go along a journey and you think you've seen what this world is, and then you meet the Schuyler sisters. And as a woman, I think, okay, now we got a show. We're always looking for ourselves. We need a very specific meal to be able to do what we do every day. I think our experience in this country is different, and the contract that was made for this country is not really what is offered to us unless we demand that. And to have a show that talks about even as women of color, I mean, it's even more true to have a show that talks about what this country is and what the promises are, and then also talks about how that worked in the lives of women, includes us in a way that we didn't see ourselves before. And we don't often see ourselves when this time in history is discussed. And I can't imagine that anybody is more grateful than women and young girls.
Yeah, I agree. I just think the characters are so strong and powerful, and it was fun. I took my daughter, I had 2 tickets, and I didn't invite my husband, who's still bitter about it. He got to go another time, but I brought my daughter, who was 15, and I was just so proud of getting her to see these powerful women. I mean, it sounds so cliched and silly even coming out of my mouth, but it's just nice to see strong, powerful, empathetic, vulnerable, amazing women on stage, writ large, for someone who's a teenage girl. It really, I valued that a lot.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say this camaraderie that you see burst onto the stage is how I think how women relate to the world. That so much of how we move through the world is based on the women that we are also surrounded by. And I think that, if I were 15, 16 and seeing Hamilton for the first time and I got introduced to the Schuyler sisters, my mind would be blown, because now we see it more. But when I was growing up, like, a lot of the stories that were surrounded by a woman's experience, there was a lot of jealousy and competition, or that she was the only woman and there were no other women around her, and it's just so refreshing to see the world that we know, that we live in, reflected back to us, that we can actually relate to these historical figures in a new way, because we're seeing them in a context that we don't usually see them, which is together and in formation. And that's really refreshing.
One of my favorite lines that Angelica says is, "I love my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind." And basically, she's picking her sister over everybody else. And that love that these sisters have for each other is so powerful and above anything else. So, going back off what you said, that camaraderie and how special and important that is beautiful, and inspiring. And, little girls watching that and learning to have those best friends, to be close to their sisters, find their sister tribe to hold them up when they become adults, and help them through life. That's really important, and I think will help them as well as it's helped me. I can't go on without my tribe of women, that have support me through my whole entire life. So I think you get a little window of that in the show. And then Eliza ends the show. It's called Alexander Hamilton, it's called Hamilton, but Eliza is ending the show, you know, and carries on his legacy.
And really brings it to the fore, right? Without her, you probably don't have this sort of extensive, you know, look at what happened in his life because of her love for him. Phillipa, tell to me about the Eliza Project. You started that with Morgan Marcel. What is it about? What does it do? How does it work?
Well, when we were in the show, I was told by Lynn that this orphanage that we sing about at the end actually still exists. It's a social service organization called Graham Windham. They work with kids and families in the New York area, and they're still running today. And so my husband and I took a trip to Graham Windham, and we met some of the community members there, some of the faculty, some of the students and the young people that are there. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I actually get to be a part of, we all get to be a part of Eliza's living, breathing legacy. This can't be the end. And so Morgan Marcel and I just wanted to get the students, the young people in the Graham Windham community in a room and maybe create some art, because what better way to get to know each other than to get into a room and sing and do some improv and have them create some of their own work. And it was really just a way to get to know them a little bit better and make that connection, because after all, we are singing about them at the end of the show. So, you know, we had some cast members teaching some classes. We were, you know, doing like, I think it was 4 consecutive weeks where we would come in every day, 1 day a week, and we would just do some classes and then have them create their own work. And it was really powerful. And I know that there were a couple of other Eliza projects that happened after I had left and after Morgan had left. You know, it's just a way to be able to say, hey, like, we have a group of people who are artists who love the arts, and we have a community of young people who are somehow connected to us because of Eliza. Let's get together and let's make some stuff. And that was really the idea.
One of the things that I think Hamilton did for Broadway as a whole, and I know things in the middle of coronavirus have obviously been shut down, but it just seemed to change how people thought about who could be cast. Like, that you could open up who you were thinking about as your lead, or every role. It didn't have to be, well, this is clearly this person and this person has to be this and it has to be this. Would you put that down as one of the biggest impacts of the show?
I certainly think that it sparks a conversation about casting and diverse casting, that we shouldn't just think of any character that is not being descriptive as being non-white is assumed to be white. I think there's this sort of like white as default horrible thing that Hollywood and show business has sort of needing to let go of now, and I think we're finally understanding that from a casting standpoint. But that the conversation needs to happen no matter what story you're telling, because I think that casting can be very important and crucial to the world that you're living in. And the question is, like, who do we need to tell this story? What are our options here? And is it important that they are specifically written as an Asian woman? Is it important that they're specifically written as a white man, and why? And to have those questions and those conversations very early on is the important part, right? And that's when we become aware and conscious of these casting decisions that we're making, is because we're having those conversations early on, as opposed to just assuming like, well, you know, they'll be whatever, and then we'll sort of like figure it out later. Like, I think people want to be a little bit more intentional now with their storytelling, and I think that's great.
I think you have, clearly it's the responsible thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, because you say so much with the words, with the music, with the, you know, with all of the other elements, but you also say so much just by putting a certain soul into that role. You know, just talking again about, you know, Black Lives Matter and viewing the show from the perspective of the world at this time, you know, you hear people, you know, talking about, oh, is there enough conversation about slavery? Is there enough conversation about, was enough time spent, you know, exposing the flaws of these heroes? Hello. I mean, I'm like, look who's cast playing the part. You're not telling us something we didn't know. That's actually the very reason why you're seeing Thomas Jefferson played by Douglas Diggs. Like, it's, you know, it's an opportunity to do some of the work. A lot of the work happens just by the soul that embodies that role, and the marriage of those things it's just extremely powerful visually. I mean, we were talking about how important it was to have women in the show. Not only is it important to have women, but these are women of color. What are we saying when we talk about the experience these women had and how left out they were in the narrative? You say more than that when it's women of color, because you're also acknowledging, you know, even with the, you know, the right to vote, who didn't get it? Like, you know, you can say so many more things when you open your mind up to, you know, who we put in this role. You know, it does so much of the work for you. It's a wonderful tool, and I'm glad that's one of the many ways they were very brilliant in terms of the creation of the show.
No, it's crazy. Like, I grew up watching Shakespeare at the Public Theater with a diverse cast. That was normal to me because that's what I saw when I was really little, you know? And I think it's not normal because it's not done enough. And that's all that we need to do, is just do it. And that's what this show has done. And, you know, there was this video, I remember Phillipa, you posted it, of this little girl that's like pointing at Phillipa, and she's like, that's me. You know, I've had a little girl say that as well, like, to me after the show. And that's the most important thing, is to have, you know, these kids, you know, watching the show on Disney Plus and seeing themselves. And the only way that they can see themselves is if people that write the shows or cast the shows cast more people of color, or, you know, are the people that are behind it and give opportunities for people to write, you know, these shows. And I think they're out there. It's not like nobody's doing it. We just need to hire these people, you know, and show people that it can work. And it has worked and it can work. And, you know, it can sell a lot of tickets, and it can, you know, it can be a global phenomenon that, you know, we've shown that. So all we need to do is do it more.
Winning often convinces people in ways talking at them might not.
There's no excuses anymore. There's really none. It's possible, and it can happen, and we just need more of it.
I have a final question that I'd like each of you to answer, and it's about the legacy of Hamilton. I had a friend who's a middle school history teacher, and she was like, what Hamilton did was make history interesting for 7th graders who pretty much hate history. They're like, well, if it was like this, we'd love it. Your stuff is boring. This is what do you think is the legacy that Hamilton leaves behind, and on any front?
I'll go first. I'm always like, am I talking too much? What's wonderful about legacy is that you don't get to say what it is. You don't get to sit where you are and say, I mean, like, you know, we control so much, we have power so much over so much, but we need to humble ourselves and be aware of the fact that we can't say I can't say what my kids are going to tell me in 5 minutes. I sure can't say what impact this is going to have on their life. You know, being, you know, doing a show about people, you know, about our first presidents, and then having the blessing of meeting, you know, Barack Obama, and just kind of hearing him, you know, look at this and love this show and talk about why it meant so much to him. And I think one of the most amazing things he said to us was, it is so rare to be appreciated for something in the time that you're doing it. He's like, please don't lose sight of how rare it is to be living in the moment of something when everybody is celebrating you. I mean, I remember before we even, I think our show was even at the Public, I feel like Oscar, who runs the Public, was comparing Lin to Shakespeare. Like, how scary is that? And we were doing these performances, with the chorus line cast. Like, in the moments before we even started this thing, we were connected to these people as though we had earned some huge legacy that we hadn't even earned yet. So yeah, this is a rare thing that happened to us, that people have made up many assumptions about how important and how powerful this is going to be. And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know. We just know, we knew what it felt like then, and we know what it feels like today. And I believe because so many young people are so moved by it, and because I know what art does to me that was made 100 years ago, if it's good, and I know this is good. So I believe very strongly that this will be around as long as we're around as human beings, but I don't know. And I love the fact that I don't get to say what's going to matter to them. I just know that I'll think they're crazy if they don't think Hamilton is brilliant. And if they can't learn something from listening to this music, then I don't know what's wrong with these kids. But I believe that whatever they decide will be, they get to pick legacy.
I think that there's a legacy of collective innovation that we are so excited by this piece of art, because it's bringing together a bunch of ideas and people and morals and history and ways of telling story, all collected into one show. And I think that's exciting because each of those individual things contributed to it. And what's so amazing for me as an artist is that when I walk into a room, I know that we will all collectively create something better than any of us could have created by ourselves. And so I hope that it also inspires that in other people, in whatever they do. If they're a history teacher, if they're a scientist, if they're an artist, that it inspires people to have these collective moments of innovation, so that they might be able to also create something larger than life that they could have ever done by themselves.
It's a big question and it's really hard to answer, but all that I can think of is dream big. That is all that I can think of all like these children and adults watching this show right now in this climate and thinking you could be from anywhere from around the world and come to this country and change it. You can. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons from the show that the show will leave behind. No matter what medium that is, whether you want to sit down and write, whether you want to start a revolution with your friends, whether, it can be anything, but you are capable of doing that. You look at Lin's life, you look at everyone in the show, of how they got here, and how this show started and what it's come to be now. While we were in the whirlwind of it, we didn't know what tomorrow was going to be. We didn't know that we were going to go to the White House the next day. We didn't know these things, but that's the power of it, right? Renee said, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be exciting. All I can think of is it inspires people to dream big without any boundaries, and that no matter where you're from or who you are, race, color, religion, is that you are capable of that.
Yes.
Jasmine and Renee and Phillipa, thank you, ladies. Really nice to chat with you. Really appreciate it.
Thank
So
you so
lovely to
much.
chat with you. Girl, you're the sequel. Keep going. Keep going, girl. We're watching you.
Mhm.
Uh, First of all, thank to the thousands who joined in this Latino Victory event. We depend on your support. We depend on your enthusiasm, and there's many jobs that you need to do from now until November 3rd, when we change the course of this country. But this event would have not been possible without the support of Loretta Everett Kaufman. She is a big supporter of the arts. She is a big supporter of progressive politics throughout the country. Of course, I need to thank Soledad O'Brien for leading such an amazing and insightful discussion, and to Renee, Jasmine, Phillipa for participating and supporting our quest and our work at Latino Victory. No show for me, it's over without thanking my wonderful and inspiring son, Lin-Manuel Miranda. To all of you, there's many jobs that we still have in the days to come, and making a plan to vote, it's super important. If your state allows voting by mail, go ahead and do that, and do it right away or as soon as you can. If your state allows voting early, make a plan and vote in person. If not, there is always November 3rd, when we are all going to make sure that we change the tone and the direction of our nation. Thank you for spending time with us.